Chapter 13. I met Steve and Tamret the next morning for breakfast in one of the government complex cafeterias, a large open space filled with important-looking beings, every one of whom made a conspicuous effort to pretend it was not looking or perceiving or pointing sensory stalks at us. Maybe it was just me they were pretending to ignore. After all, Tamret and Steve hadn't blown anybody up. Tamret's dark hair was a little messy, and I got the impression that she was the sort of girl who had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, but she managed to throw on what would have been called a summer dress on Earth. For my part, I figured I'd start it in style, and wore my red classic Trek t-shirt with the insignia over the heart. The less said about the things that Steve ate for breakfast, the better, though. I will mention that the food didn't want to be eaten, and Steve had to remove the stingers before he could pop them into his mouth. And while he was happy with the selection of seemingly living goodies, I was a little more challenged. American breakfast preferences were nowhere to be found, and I found nothing like dry cereal or eggs or waffles. There were strangely shaped fruits and vegetables, as well as plants that were clearly neither, and I decided to make a point to try as many of them as my HUD would let me eat over the course of the next year. The most popular breakfast food in the Confederation seemed to be the endless styles of porridge made from grains and plants. I helped myself to a bowlful as well as a plateful of slices of blue fruit wedges, streaked with yellow stripes. They were pretty, but fairly mild in taste. I wasn't ever going to crave this food, but at least I wasn't going to starve. After we ate, we headed to the classroom, which was a whole lot like an Earth classroom. Chairs, a lectern, and screens for projecting data. This was my first chance to get a look at the rest of the Rural and Ishi delegations, and they were as unfriendly as the rest of the human delegation. Also, to make things even more relaxed, Mrs. Price would be sitting in on every session. She glared at my t-shirt, but said nothing. Tamret and Steve and I sat in the back, like the bad kids. The other humans were sitting up front. Charles, wearing a polo shirt with his private school's logo on it, looked eager to learn. Mi-sun sat quietly and remained utterly unreadable to me. Nyana had a smile plastered on her face, but it looked phony, like something she slapped on while pretending not to notice lurking photographers from Chess Monthly. "They're never going to accept you, you know," Tamret said. She was running her fingers through her hair, trying unsuccessfully to tame it. "What?" I hoped that blushing didn't translate. "Those people from your planet," Tamret said. She was now glaring at Nyana, who noticed and glared right back. Tamret accepted the challenge and kept her eyes locked until Nyana looked away. "You like that one, don't you?" "No, not really," I said. "Unkindness to randoms, remember?" Tamret shook her head, like she found me deeply disappointing. "You shouldn't be so obvious." The amazing thing about school is that you can move it from a stuffy classroom in a crumbling building to a futuristic government compound on an ancient space station. You can replace your range of usual student types with aliens. You can introduce advanced technology, and for all that, it still manages to retain its essential school-like nature. You sit in a chair, you listen to a teacher, and you wish you were out of that room doing anything else. The three other Ishi were hard to read. Joe, the other male, and Jill and Anne, the two females. They all dressed similarly in their tail-accommodating tunics, and I had a hard time telling them apart. The truth was, I had a hard time telling Steve apart from the rest of them at first until I made a point of memorizing subtle color patterns on his scales. I was suddenly a little more sympathetic to the trouble he'd had distinguishing me from Charles. "What's with your names?" I asked Steve after I'd been introduced to his delegation.
"Oh, that," he said. "Yeah, single-syllable names were the popular thing for kids our culture. Kids our age."
"But those names are just all—" I was floundering.
"All what?"
Steve demanded, looking particularly a bit defensive. "And never mind," I said, deciding that I would just have to accept the Ishi names as one of the galaxy's many mysteries. The Rorals were easier to keep track of. Other than Tamret, they all had reddish-brown fur, and I wondered if Tamret belonged to a minority ethnic group, or if there were just different fur colors like there were different house cats back home. The other Rural girl, Thiel, was taller than Tamret, and had russet hair, just a little darker than her fur, and always wore a sour, superior expression that reminded me a bit of Nyana. Tamret told me that Thiel was the daughter of one of the world's most famous whittlers, apparently carving shapes out of wood was a huge deal in their culture, and Theo's father was like royalty. Theo herself was considered something of a whittling prodigy and somewhat famous, and she carried herself as though she expected everyone to be in awe of her at all times. Then there were the two boys. Semjay was smaller than the two girls, and Tamret said he was supposed to be some kind of engineering genius. He kept to himself and almost never seemed to seek out company, but the others in his delegation consulted him the minute there was anything in doubt. He was smart, and they respected him for it. Ardov was taller than I was, and broadly built with wide shoulders and a thick neck, like he was destined to play rural football. He wore a tight, short-sleeved shirt and pants made out of a dark black fabric, and he had a face that was action hero handsome, rugged and square-jawed, with high cheekbones and piercing emerald eyes. Like Mi-sun, he was a martial artist master back on his home planet. He was also a national champion in something called War Etched in Stone, a sport in which contestants pummeled each other in a pit while simultaneously solving high-level math problems. Right away, I noticed he tended to scowl at Tamret, like he found her disgusting. He caught me looking and shot me a look like he hated me. At that point, I decided to hate him right back. I figured it would save me time down the road. Once we got started, Dr. Roop explained that the purpose of the class was to teach us about the operations and functions of the station, as well as the history of the Confederation and the larger mystery of the Formers. He stood in the front of the class in one of his dark Confederation suits, arms behind his back, neck stretched high. My own neck was going to get sore from looking at him.
"Most of you have gained several levels already," he said, trying not to gaze in my direction. "But don't think that it will be easy from here on out. The first 5 take virtually no effort. The second 5 require somewhat more. Moving from 10 to 11, you will discover, takes a great deal longer."
Try blowing up a starship, I thought. That packs on the points.
"You will have to work hard to earn each level," he continued. "You have a year to gain a total of 80 levels per group. It is extremely challenging. Almost half of all delegations fail. Don't ever relax or rest on your laurels. No matter how close you are, do not assume you will reach 80 levels until you have them. And keep in mind that no one will try to obstruct or hinder you, but you will not receive any help either. No one but me will help you. I will gladly assist your work towards your advancement, so don't hesitate to ask. I am the only ally you have here, but I am everyone's ally equally."
Dr. Roop explained that the best way to go about earning experience points. We could book some time in the sim rooms, learning more about starship operations. There were computer programming rooms, which allowed us to rack up points by writing computer codes. Then there was the sparring room, where we could test our combat skills against either a real or simulated opponent. If we were in a less violent mood, we might visit the research facilities where we had the chance to work on math and engineering problems. Much to my surprise and happiness, we also had the option of playing strategy games like Approximate Results from Endeavors. The important thing was to gain skills that would make us of use to the Confederation, but there wasn't a clear program of study, and those individuals or groups who could not figure out how to gain points would be left behind. He then ended the session by assigning us about 150 pages of history to read for the next day.
"Keep in mind that learning about the Confederation's history will get you experience."
We rose from our desk, and Dr. Roop called me over. He saw that Mrs. Price was eyeing us, so he kept his voice low.
"No one believes that you're still level 1 at this point. It's starting to draw the wrong sort of attention. Go up about 6 or 7 for now, but don't ever pull ahead of your classmates, and do it before 1600 today."
"Why? What happens then?" I asked.
"You are meeting with the Chief Justice of the Xeno Affairs Judicial Council," he said. "It is time to discuss the legal and political implications of your actions on the Dependable."
Steve and Tamret were waiting for me out in the hallway. Dr. Roop hadn't said that the meeting with the Chief Justice was a secret, and so I planned to tell them, but not in front of everybody else.
"What did he want? And how do you tell him apart from her lot?"
Steve pointed a scaly thumb at Tamret.
"Wait, you think we look the same as Dr. Roop?"
she asked, scrunching up her face.
"It's all that fur."
"You haven't noticed that his neck is like a quarter of his body size?" Tamret asked. Steve cocked his head and considered the information.
"Yeah,"
he said thoughtfully.
"I reckon that's true."
While we were talking, I watched Charles, Nyana, and me son heading in our direction. Nyana stopped, and then the other two walked on, and she came back.
May I speak to you for a moment?
She asked, and so that no one would mistake her for a nice person, she pretended not to see Steve and Tamrat. I was not about to make my only friends on the station move, so I walked 20 feet down the hall with her. "What's up?" I said, pretending that direct contact with a member of my species wasn't a big deal for me. She looked down, her cheeks darkened in what might have been a blush on a girl who on occasion experienced sympathetic feelings.
You received my note?
Yeah. Thanks? Did I need to thank someone for thanking me?
You couldn't trouble yourself to write back?
You told me not to speak to you.
In public,
she clarified.
It's rather rude not to write back to someone who's risking her reputation by being nice to you.
Ah. I couldn't think of anything else to say.
She began, and then shook her head. I'm quite unhappy about how we've treated you. I wanted you to know that.
Really? This was interesting. Maybe if Nyana was beginning to soften, the others would too.
I asked that we include you in our leveling projects, but I've been outvoted. I'm sorry to say. Mrs. Price was particularly adamant, and I'm clearly not used to my opinions being disregarded this way,
she added. Like, maybe that was the real point. Okay, I said, no doubt proving her faith in me was warranted.
I do not make a habit of sticking my neck out for others.
She stood there, as though she were a bellhop, waiting for a tip. Thank you? I ventured.
You are most welcome.
Then she turned and hurried off after her friends. Now I didn't know what to think. It looked like the others weren't about to invite me back anytime soon, but Nyana appeared to want to make amends for her bad behavior. I felt myself smile. And then I saw Steve and Tamrat watching me. I think I was beginning to read Steve well enough to know he had no idea what was going on. He kept tasting the air for signals. But you did not have to understand Roral's well at all to get Tamrat's expression as she glowered at me with her lavender eyes.
I'm glad to see you and the Ice Queen are friends now,
she said when I walked back over to them. She folded her arms across her chest. She's just trying to do the right thing, I said. Unlike the rest of my species.
I can see that, Tamrat said, but I can also see that I don't care.
Anything else she might have had to say was quickly forgotten because the rest of the Rorals were walking past us now. Ardov, the handsome boy, grinned at Tamrat with a mean self-satisfaction I'd seen on too many human faces before. I know you're a random, but it's an insult to our species if you hang out with these hairless freaks. This guy was big and muscular, and I had no doubt he had smacked around his share of Roral fanboys back at his home planet, but I was not about to keep quiet like I had with the antlered reporter. Besides, I don't like to be made to feel self-conscious for not having fur. It's not your business who she spends her time with, I said, wishing that my voice hadn't chosen that particular moment to break.
I don't think the translator's working,
the girl, Thiel, said with a nasty smirk.
I'm just getting animal sounds.
Actually, it is my business, Ardov said, not bothering to look at me. Instead, he edged me out of the way, so he was standing between me and Tamrat. You're making us look bad, Snowflake.
Ugh.
Thiel made a gagging face.
Let her play with those creatures. You don't want her chasing after us, do you?
Yeah, that's a good point, Ardov said with a smug nod. I tried to move myself back between them. Maybe you should, I began, but that was as far as I got. Ardov had his hand on my chest and was shoving me away. It wasn't like he was trying to knock me down. He was moving me, like I was a piece of furniture. Don't touch me again, he said to me. You won't like what happens. Before I could answer, Steve was standing in front of me, leveling his dark eyes at Ardov. He extended one of his thin fingers and tapped Ardov's shoulder. Touch, he said. He said it without inflection, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. Ardov shook his head and snorted. The three of you are just looking for trouble, aren't you?
No, we aren't,
Tamrat said, and had her eyes cast down, like she was a servant and Ardov was her extremely mean employer.
We were just talking.
Who gave you permission to talk? Ardov asked in the mock serious way kids like him get when they're working so hard to pretend they have authority They almost start to believe it. My teeth were now grinding. Ardov was the extraterrestrial embodiment of everything I hated. I thought I'd gotten away from this kind of thing, but here was another kid who acted however he wanted and never faced any real consequences. Dealing with someone like that always started out nasty and ended up worse. Steve's muscles visibly stiffened under his scales, like he was getting ready to fight. So far, Ardov had done nothing but talk, and if Steve threw the first punch, he would be the one to get in trouble for it. I admired his guts, though. Ardov was a lot bigger than he was. It was Thiel who saved us, though.
I'm bored and hungry, she said. Can we just go already?
Ardov looked at Tamrat. You're coming with us, Snowflake. It wasn't a question. You can fetch our food for us.
Oh, no way, Thiel said. I don't want to have to look at that stuff, its ugly face.
I won't let her actually eat with us, Ardov said. Just serve us. Thiel turned away.
I don't want it touching my food.
Ardov smiled at Tamrat. Next time, then. Tamrat watched them go, her lavender eyes narrow slits, her expression unreadable, and not only because she was an alien. What was that about? I asked her. What's his problem exactly? She didn't answer me. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she turned to Steve.
You want to go mess with Thiel's stuff?
Steve appeared to consider this for a moment.
Yeah, that could be fun.